Hello there, ICS3C folks. This is our first big lesson, I'd say, on JavaScript, where we've got a note here, and you've got it in front of you, I hope. Um, and this one you don't have to take any notes, except for you can add anything that you want to this note, and then you're going to save it in your file. This is kind of like your notebook, remember. This one's on data types, and the first lesson talked about a whole bunch of stuff in JavaScript. This data types business is sort of where we get started in a programming language. So this is where we're getting started. It says, compared to other programming languages, JavaScript has a very flexible data structure. And of course, if JavaScript is your first programming language that you learned, it's going to be hard for you to compare. But really, we don't really have to worry too much about the types of data that we're using, whether it's an integer or a real number or whatever, that JavaScript usually just looks after it for us, which is nice. It says any numeric data behaves the same as in math class. Here are the symbols for some basic math operations. So uh, the operation and the symbol in JavaScript, adding and subtracting are the same. Multiply is the asterisk, which is Shift 8 on my keyboard. And I want to mention that JavaScript knows the order of operations just like in math class. So I've got my JS bin here. I'm gonna in these lessons I think I'll try and go between a couple of different ways to show you JavaScript. But notice that I've got console log 4 plus 2 times 3, and it'll do the 2 times 3 first to get 6, and then 4 plus that is 10. What this second line is, we'll show you that in a second, but that follows bedmass. Back in the lesson, we've got division, which is this backslash. I'll show you that in a second here. Oops, show you that back in my console.log 7 divided by 4, like that, division. And I press run, and it gives me, I'm going to clear it and then run it. So you can see there's that first line, that's 10. And then 7 divided by 4 is 1.75. And then the next one, this percent sign actually gives me the remainder. So when I have 7 divided by 4 and I wanted the remainder, I get 3. That actually has a special name called modulo, but we won't worry too much about that. This symbol here we call the remainder is also called modulo. Modulo. If you want to add that to your note, that's a fancy math term, but also pretty important in computer science at times. Exponents. We're going to want to do exponents at times. And for exponents, it's actually our first look at a function in Java. So if we want to do an exponent, we have to use this math.pow. Pow for power, and then the first number is a base, and the second number is the exponent. So back in my JS bin, here I'm going to clear this. I could comment out all my other code here. Remember, comments are 2 lines, and it goes a different color in JSBin, which is kind of nice. Console.log, that's so it's going to print out, and I'm going to go math.pow, and then the first one is the base, so say 4, and the second one is the exponent. So this is going to go 4 to the exponent 3, which means 4 times 4 times 4, and that's going to be 64. 4 times 4 is 16 times 4 is 64. So that's how we do exponents in JavaScript. If we want to do a square root, it's math.sqrt, and we just put the number that we want to take the square root of inside the brackets. This is another example of a function. So what kind of number would you like to take the square root of? How about the square root math.sqrt of 49, because that's one we know and we can check. Clear that old stuff, run, and I see that it's 7. Dandy. Keep going. Pi. If I wanted to use pi, the 3.14159927 blah 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 blah, math.pi. And so if I wanted to print out what pi is, oops, I go to my console.log math dot capital P capital I. That's a convention in most computer science languages that if it's a constant like pi, or there's a bunch of science constants, that it's in capital. So if I run this now, clear it and run it, there's pi to a whole bunch of decimal places. And if I wanted to actually round that off, I could have a function that would do that for me too. And I'm going to show you that when I get to a bigger program. Is that it for this? Yep, that's it for this slide. On to the next slide. When we use names to represent values, we must first declare them with the keyword var. Var stands for variable, right? And so the general syntax is var. Var is a keyword. Variable name is anything that we pick. It can't have spaces in it. It can't start with a special character, but pretty much anything else that we have is okay. And then it's equal to value, and as you've noticed, probably all JavaScript commands end with a semicolon there. So if I wanted to show you that, JSBin, I'm going to comment that stuff out. So if I had var, and I could put any old variable name, and it equals, I don't know, 3.14. Doesn't matter. And so that's a valid statement. Notice that if I ran this, nothing would happen because I haven't asked it to print anything out. It would have this any old variable in memory, and then if I wanted to print that out later or use it in a calculation, notice that right now in JSBin, you see it's got red there. It's telling me that there's an error somewhere, and that's because this line doesn't have a semicolon on the end. And you're probably getting used to some of the, and there's the 3.14. If you called it the wrong name or you spelt your variable wrong, you'd get some different error messages. That's an error message. It's saying any old variable is not defined, and it tells you where you've made your error, and so you could fix that up, variable. And so now that's better. Clear run. There it is. That's how we use variables. And so it says, this program calculates the volume of a cone. And I'm not going to type that in. You can type it in and play around with it if you want to. This was done, I believe, this was done in Notepad++, I believe, because of the number lines there, but I'm not sure. Notice that we got two variables, a radius and a height. We have a comment, double lines. And then even when we calculated the volume, use math.py times math.pow radius 2, right, because it's the radius squared, and then times the height. And then I actually combined string output in quotes, the volume is, and then volume, and then you notice this to fixed 2. That actually rounds off the volume to 2 decimal places. It says math.pow and volume.toFixed and even console.log. Even this console.log are all examples of built-in JavaScript functions that allow us to perform certain tasks. So this to fixed business actually allows us to round some of the data. So if I were to, I'm going to comment this part out and go back to my value of pi, and I can actually string these things together. And if I wanted to put it out, pi out to, say, 3 decimal places and run that, there's pi to 3 decimal places. Notice it's in quotes, so this is a string value. Math point dot pi to fixed is actually a string value, which is a little bit strange. What's a string, you say? Well, a string in our note is something like this text, but it's also anything that's in quotes. It says the volume dot to fixed function rounds the output to 2 decimal places, and I just showed you that with pi to 3 decimal places. Lastly, strings. What's strings? Strings are what we would think of as text. We enclose text in double quotes. For example, console.log, hello world, this thing here, this part right here, that's a string. What's going to be printed out is actually only the things that are in between the quotes. The quotes won't be printed out. That says we can still perform operations and functions on text. So, for instance, if I had this little tiny program, notice that I've got a variable name is called string1 and a different variable name is string2. And since I've got it in quotes, The computer, JavaScript, knows that it's a string rather than a number, but I can still add them together. And what this actually does, it produces the output whatever smashed together. So this plus sign, the addition sign, is for a string operation called concatenation. Concatenation is a fancy word for string addition, smashing two strings together. That's all that is. Other functions give the length of a string or a substring, a part of the bigger string. So a substring is like a little part of the word. So it says console.log, this is a sentence.length. Notice that this part is a string, and the dot length is a function that gives the length of that. So basically, what this line would do, and I'll show you this. Well, I think I can copy it, put it in my bin here. I'm going to comment that out and put it in my bin. Put it in my bin and run that. Basically, here, and clear it. Just so what it's going to do is JavaScript's going to count up all the letters in that string that are between the quotes and print that out. Okay, great. What's this substring business mean? It says this is a sentence dot substring 1116 produces the output, while 18 was the first part. The second part is ENTEN. So the substring between 11 and 16. Now this is a little confusing because if you're to count, let's count, shall we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 for the space, 9, 10, 11. Shouldn't it include the S? Shouldn't this start with an S? And the answer is absolutely not, just because of something very strange that happens in almost all computer science languages. Strings count with start counting with place 0. So even though there are 18 letters, this is the 0th character. So we start counting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the first one printed out is the E. And then the 16 is the first letter not included. So if I keep counting, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 is not counted, not printed off, so all of those ones were. And if you have to do some work with substrings, you have to be very careful about this sort of counting. It is a little bit tricky. And I think some of the exercises that you had in Code Academy helped you think about that. Good. I think that's it for the note. You'll want to save up all any of the extra little dots and notes that you put to yourself. And then there's a couple of exercises to do, and then I think that's just about it for the day. The next lesson is going to be on if structures. So that's another story.